Welcome to the Well Workplaces podcast, where we chat with health and wellbeing leaders that are on a mission to create positive changes in the workplace. I'm your host, Tom Bosner, and today I'm extremely pleased to be chatting with James Hatchman, who's the CEO of Voice of Health. James, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. So great to be here.
I love that I just sprung this on you, that it was a live event like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Look, as I was saying, I'm going to have to make sure I censor myself a little bit better because there's no, I can't get away with things that we would have usually edited out in post-production. So I'll make sure that I keep things together. But we'll see how we go.
I love it, mate. Now, if you are listening or watching this live, feel free to say hello and tell us where you're listening from. We are live from Melbourne, and it is the first day of spring, so it's been a lovely morning with the sun shining, and really keen to talk to James today all about Voice of Health. We'll touch on probably firstly what it is all about, the Voice of Health, and I'm really interested in talking about active listening and basically how this peer-to-peer platform could be even used in a workplace setting. James, just to kick us off, I guess, we've talked a lot about, on this podcast, we've been talking a lot about mental health, and particularly, in the media, even over the last month, there's been that reference to the shadow pandemic. We know that like a lot of the services that are getting kind of worked on or overrun, they're really focusing on that, I guess, that what I would call downstream mental health, which is that critical, side where people are venturing towards mental ill health, or maybe they're calling lifeline, and all the stats and all the things that are coming up are that they're all around that, I guess, that downstream part. I guess to paint a picture, I guess Voice of Health really focuses on the other side, which is really the highly preventative side. So James, maybe to start off, could you tell us a little bit about you and also Voice of Health and just how that fits in?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and you described it absolutely perfectly, which is that we do try and sit right at the beginning of that mental health journey for a lot of people, because you're right. In a lot of cases, for a lot of people, the leap it takes to go from potentially suffering in silence or not seeking help to, okay, well, the thing that's recommended to me most often is a crisis line or something way downstream, and you go, well, could we capture something, capture those individuals in an earlier stage and, help them and assist them from there? And if they do need additional assistance, move them on to the correct services from that, rather than, leaving them lost all the way up until, like you said, that downstream space. So that's kind of where Voice of Health sits in. We are a preventative mental health organization. We're heavily based around lived experience, empathy, peer support, and active listening. And that's kind of the methodology we follow a lot of. And so that's essentially how Voice of Health came about in terms of, as its digital offering is, our main kind of, I would call it the flagship product of what we do is an app that connects users to trained active listeners who are there to provide a space for someone to confide in someone else, have someone who understands them, build that trust, that ongoing relationship, and try and attend to some of those issues well and truly before they may potentially flow into, I guess, like you said, that more downstream space.
Yeah, really good summary, James. And I guess, like, going back to the very origin of Voice of Health, one of the things that I find with, especially over the last, say, 6 months, one of the great things of this pandemic, and I'm going to highlight a positive because all we hear is and talk about is the bad stuff, but one of the best things is that we're more open with our mental health. We're having more conversations probably with our friends and our family about how we're actually feeling. I know, like, for me, I reckon pre-pandemic, I don't know that I would speak to my mum and dad about how I'm actually going, besides the superficial stuff, as much as I have. So it's been that opening up. Is that kind of where the concept of active listening and was there a story behind Voice of Health that it really sort of started this idea for a business or a platform?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess there's kind of two parts to that. It's the first part with what you said, I think is so true. It's this kind of conflict in our minds. We go, yes, we're more successful now because of, potentially some of these issues and what COVID has brought on. but it's also heartwarming to know that people are actually going, okay, I need to know, I know I need to prioritize my mental health. And so I'm looking for services like this. And we've had a huge increase in the amount of people enrolling in our active listening course, which means that they're consciously thinking, I need this skill so that I can better provide support to the people around me. And I'm like, well, that just warms my heart even more. I love to see that. But I guess the premise of kind of where Voice of Health grew from, it really is from probably myself and Luke, my co-founder's lived experience. We often kind of describe it as representing both sides to the same coin, in that he probably more closely represents with connects with the lived experience that is his own personal struggles through anxiety and through depression. And the biggest thing for him that eventually helped him, really move through that and grow from that point. And he even says he sees his anxiety as now as a strength, not as a weakness as a result. But it was actually that opening up to his peers and not saying, bottling it up and going, hey, this is what I'm actually going through. This is the reason why I missed, this particular catch up is because of this. And that honesty meant that his friends around him went, actually, you know what, I felt the same way. But it wasn't that moment where he got given advice on how to handle it. It was actually just having someone understand, listen, and empathize with him. And that's kind of where it then connects to my most probably relevant lived experience with regards to Voice of Health, which is that I've been on the other side, which is that I've had family members who have really needed that support, and not necessarily, once again, that advice, but just being that supporting guide, actively listening to them, really empathizing with what they're going through and helping them come to the point of growth, not necessarily just giving advice all the time. So I think that's where the active listening methodology came in. And that's why we thought, well, why not create something where we could upskill everybody to be able to provide that level of support? Because we all, as human beings, have our own lived experience. And so how can we empower that lived experience in a positive way, and use that to support others?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, James. That's really interesting on how it all kind of, I guess, where I'm really always interested in how ideas start and where they come from. And it makes sense how you've put this into turned it into a platform where people with the lived experience can connect with people who need the help. I guess as well, what's quite interesting for me anyway, is that from my, in my background as a health professional, and I know you've chatted with some of our, some health professionals along the way. Natalie Flatt's been on this show, and she's said hello in the comments actually here from LinkedIn. Hi Nat, how you going? One of the things that we see in a workplace setting anyway is that there's a lot of talk around preventative measures. There's a big role for, I guess, creating that environment that is safe from an organizational level. But sometimes the help part is always on the, you need help. So, or here's the services that you can access. So as a employee, go and access those services. And they are really on the critical, not critical side, but they're more on that really I'm not just going to listen to you, I'm actually going to give you solutions as well. And I find personally that some of the help that I've personally needed myself over the last 12 months is I haven't really needed help. I've probably just needed a different person's ear than my wife's to talk about about what's going on. And that's helped more than say if I went to someone who was providing direct solutions and, questions and answers. Really, really interesting, James. So Voice of Health, to break down the so if someone was to go on there now, as someone that was a member of the public, they jumped on, what's it sort of look like? So for them, just to explain the context or how it kind of links in.
Definitely, yeah. For us, I guess, as far as whenever it came to user experience design, we've had to co-design it with mental health in mind. And so for us, it was always about how can we make it as simple as possible. And a big thing, and I guess one of our most, our strongest values is the equitable access to mental health support. And so part of that was not just, making it easy to use, but also, making it accessible. And it's actually free as well is a big part of it, because, it's like, oh, it's accessible, but then it's $250 a session. It's like, well, that's not really accessible, is it? And so for what we're providing, it's as simple as, downloading the app, logging in however you'd like. There's some basic onboarding process just to get a little bit of information, and then you get taken straight to the active listeners list. You scroll through, you find someone who has potentially similar support areas to you, and you can start talking straight away. And if they're available, then you start that process. And I think for us, a big thing is that we've also found a lot of people love is the ability to be able to keep that ongoing relationship, not having to explain yourself every time you ring up the service or or you access that service. So we train all of our active listeners to go, hey, look, even if you just say the simple words of, hey, I'm here when you need me, like that can be so powerful for someone. They go, oh, I don't have to explain this every single time. I built that relationship. And just in those moments where, yeah, like you said, you don't want the same ear, listener, you can go out and find an active listener that is there to be able to provide that support and just kind of go through it, and not, like you said, not necessarily give advice and solutions, but just be there for you. And we've found that people just love that. Yeah, they love that. And it's interesting because and it's a conversation I had just recently around, there's power in obviously sharing with our loved ones, but sometimes there's also power in sharing with someone who has no preconceived assumptions of who you are as a person, and just letting them process what you say on surface value and go from there. Because if we've known someone for a long time, ironically, they're going to bring what we always call it downloading listening, which is they're going to bring their pre-existing judgments of what they think the situation is to that situation. So there is power in actually talking to someone new because they have no pre-existing judgments of who you are as a person. And so there's also that connection that we can try and facilitate as well.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that's really cool. So if you're on the user side, if that's the right word to call it, you then get to chat with an active listener who's trained by you guys. On the active, the mode of communicating, is it voice or text, or how does it work?
So it's currently text-based, just because obviously we actually have the technology for voice calls. It's actually not too difficult to build, but it's all of the things around risk mitigation, making sure that our active listeners have the capacity to be able to provide that level of support. Even just small things around, okay, well, if it's user-driven for the voice calls, could they misinterpret it as a crisis service? So then we have to implement measures that'll make it so that active listeners are the one that actually initiate the call. So it's actually all the business logic that surrounds and the risk mitigation that surrounds voice calls is the reason we don't have it currently in the app. But we actually have the technology built because we're still just solidifying the business logic to actually bring it in. It is, it's going to be voice calls at some point, hopefully very soon. But it is at the moment just messaging, which we've found that actually, especially with a lot of the younger generation, they actually are quite. It's a lot of the work we do is about building confidence in being able to talk about what you're going through, to then build on top of that, and maybe then that means go see a psychologist. So we're not trying to replace those services. It's about maybe we're complementing them and helping people build that confidence, reduce that leap to get support, and then maybe potentially recommend that they go and see someone else if they need higher level of support as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. The text actually, as you said that, like the younger generation, I guess anyone younger than me, probably wouldn't mind the text, because it is sort of not a less threatening way of doing it, and maybe a way of, I guess, just sort of reaching out to that person that you don't really know. I think one of the big things, James, over the last 12 months for a lot of people with their mental well-being is because we have all been, isolated or, locked down in various forms. If you're like living by yourself, you probably then, you're connecting on these calls for work and that kind of thing. But if you're isolated, you're really missing that sense of belonging in that community. And so that text, that opportunity to reach out to a stranger who is trained in active listening is such a cool concept. I absolutely love it, mate. I reckon it's great.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, well, you'd hope so. On the active listening side, I wouldn't mind exploring that if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
What are the real key sort of, if you're training active listeners, and I love that word, by the way, what are the key things, or what are the aspects of active listening that you think are important?
Yeah, there's such a rich topic when it comes to active listening, because, and it's interesting because there are some other active listening training out there, and it's like we always have a bit of a laugh because there's some that are just like how to get the most out of your employees by listening to them, and you're like, okay, there's a bit more to active listening than that. Okay, obviously we're co-designing our course with mental health involved, so there's a lot more, and there's the whole emotional connection side of active listening. So I guess some of the big key concepts is obviously things like building trust, the different levels of listening, and how to use empathetic listening and generative listening within that space. The art of crafting a thoughtful question, that's honestly one of my favorite parts about it, because it really brings in the active side of things, because my famous line is that advice doesn't remain relative, but a question does. If we could give advice to 10 people, it's only relevant to 5 of them. Sorry, advice to 10 people and only relevant to 5 of them, but I could ask a question of all of them and they could find the advice that's most relevant to them. So questioning is a big part of it. What are some of the other things we talk about? I mean, even in our training, we talk about even crisis identification, because that's an important part. Knowing when that person is getting to that point. The different types of questions. How maybe just the prefix of your question. Maybe if you're using a why question, maybe the people you're talking to are actually getting defensive because it sparks that inner critic in them, when maybe you should be using what or how questions. We talk about the power of perspective, understanding motivation, intent, and even understanding the expectations of you as an active listener, and where the boundaries are, and when to know, or so how to know when you've gone into a space that maybe you're not trained to do. So, I mean, there's so much. I'm now I sound like I'm rambling, because I'm trying to remember everything in the course all at once. But there's just so much, and it's and we learn it. The best thing is that even the people coming through our active listening training, when I ask them, and we run a webinar as the second part of that training, where we interact with everyone. And one of my favorite slides in that is, what's your definition of active listening? And we continue to get more and more answers. It's about being present. It's about removing judgment. It's around, really focusing on the person. There's a whole mindfulness aspect to active listening, which is, I'm talking to you. And then what if my brain starts, concentrating on your background? How quickly can I bring my brain back to the person I'm focusing on? So that's another active part of it. Or, am I listening with the intent of replying, or am I actually absorbing what you're saying? Am I processing? Am I okay to sit in a little bit of silence and then respond? So there's so many parts. One of my favorite stats actually was that we give ourselves 30% less time to respond to others than we would give them to respond to us. And so we're so quick to reply. And so there's so much in active listening. I love it. Obviously, you can tell, getting passionate, I'm just rambling now.
No, that's really, really interesting. I think for as you're talking there around, maybe this is my active listening part failing here, but as you were talking, I was actually started to think about in a workplace setting. And in a workplace setting now, we are still working remotely or in a hybrid sort of setting. And so there's a big part of this is like if you're managing a team or whatever, really I guess how leadership has evolved. If you go back, say 10 years ago, or maybe further, it was really that kind of hierarchy type thing where there was a manager who, you had to report to, that kind of thing. And as the working model has changed, so has the emphasis of the leader. It's not really the visionary thing anymore. It is, but it's really, I feel like there's a strong role in leadership now, or in business or in management, for those people that are like connectors and integrators, where they can connect with their team members one-on-one, also in a team setting, but basically find a way to, I guess, use active listening to collaborate, pull out great ideas, and kind of build people up. Do you see that in, I guess, the training that you're doing? Do you see that there's applications for this in, say, the workplace as well?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's something that I try and implement with my team as well, is that, we can use active listening to because, anyone could I could give anyone a job description and give them a set of things to do. But if I actually take a moment to really listen to what's important to them and what they're curious about and where their passions lie, and maybe empathize with their situation, not only do I get the person doing that role, but I find out all of these other things that potentially they can contribute. So, and you can do that with traditional roles that you wouldn't think to do. Like, my lead developer is an incredible business strategist. You would never know that unless I took the moment to listen to him, connect with him, find out more about him, and go, wow, we can empower that, and we can make that. And so the leadership changes, because it's not, I'm not giving him a list of things to do. He's coming to me going, hey, what about this? Because we've taken a moment to really connect with him. And I think that sort of when you hear get the most out of your employees by really listening to them, that's not the quite the message that you should take out of active listening. But I think it's a really important thing that can be applied, especially within the leadership space. And if you're only at the moment, all working from home and connecting like we are here online, it becomes even more important, because you don't have that that moment where you can pass them in the office and go, oh, they don't seem okay today. It's like, so you've only got that time where you're meeting online to really try and connect with them. So making that extra effort is important, and it's something we always talk about. There's a whole section of our training that's about building trust online. What are the things we can do? How do we have, what are the minimal encourages we can use just to show that we're listening and that we really care? Definitely, I think it's applicable.
Yeah. No, that's really cool, because I guess coming at it from a workplace angle and future of work angle here, I guess the skills that we need for the future to lead teams to engage with each other, even peer to peer. I guess there's a potential here for something like this, where in an organization there's that peer to peer connection, but you're going to need a digital solution that brings it kind of together. So if you're thinking of like a big organization where there's 1,000 people or more, but they're working all from home, all in different spots. The other problem that we've come across in these conversations on this podcast is that, the question of how do you onboard someone in an organization who's maybe just come out of uni? How do you bring them on in a remote environment and make their onboarding experience really great, and also so that they feel comfortable and connected to the organization? So it feels like maybe there's that. I know that in these organizations that there are some peer-to-peer type networking and these types of things, but there's not really, I guess, a formalized way of bringing it all together to suit the future of work. My question probably is, do you see that Voice of Health, whilst it's your own, this is your own business now, and it's obviously running with people jumping on and getting started, and also from the trainer side, they're doing the active listening training with you guys. Do you see that this has potential in a bigger scale business as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's kind of two elements to that. One is that, definitely we would like to start, obviously, putting some of the training that we do into the corporate space, because I know that a lot of organizations are going, we do this, the kind of traditional tick the box type of training, but how could we actually, implement workshops and training that shows new employees, hey, wow, this is actually a workplace that really, cares, and actually really wants to look after my well-being, and is trying to create that connection, is facilitating that. And it's not that kind of traditional model that is, kind of done to death. But, so that new age of organizations that are trying to implement that into workplaces, I think is important. From the kind of more technical and solution side of things, we're actually in the process of developing a corporate version of what we do, which will actually give organizations access to their own kind of corporate space, where we can actually facilitate providing them with active listeners, or they can actually put their own active listeners up there as well. So depending on the scale of the organization, we want to make it both accessible to small businesses as well, who don't have a team, don't have a HR department. They're just a small business, but they would like to have that opportunity to access active listeners. Or much bigger corporates who go, well, actually, we already have a well-being team, but they all connect via Teams and sometimes Zoom and sometimes emails, and they text. And it's like, how do we create like a space and then continue to update them and things like that? So there's those two sides of things, and I think there is a definite need for there's a cry out for that space, because I've definitely spoken to I had a great chat last week with a really good friend of mine, and she just started a brand new role, big, very lots of responsibility, and she's like, I'm struggling because I'm like, I don't have those micro interactions with the people around me. So it's like, so I need something that facilitates that connection that's not work based, not like, hey, get this done type of situation. So it's something that we're really focusing on at the moment as well.
Yeah, because I guess to expand on that idea, you could have leaders or managers take your active listening course, and then they could be, as well as anyone else who wants to learn it, or it could be even in smaller organizations, it could be that everyone's an active listener and it's just part of the culture. This is what you sign up for when you join this. And what an inclusive workplace, what a really safe space as well, where everyone can connect, and also if it is, like, even if you don't go into the voice space and you do keep it text, it's quite basically accessible and non-threatening as well. Do you see any other key benefits for workplaces if you were, hypothetically in one, that the value of this type of model would bring?
Additional ones. I mean, I certainly agree with what you said around, like, if you could create a culture where it's like, hey, we all learned active listening, rather than just leaders. I think that's a great, because, even if, okay, let's say the leader is, done the active listening training, they're talking to the employee, and they're, it might still be a little bit scary for an employee to reach out to someone who traditionally is higher up in the organization. But if you empowered everyone in the organization with active listening, well, then they could go to their colleague who they work with day to day and have a meaningful connection, rather than just, their, your kind of day-to-day operational type of conversations. So I think there's a lot of power in being able to give it to everyone in the organization, because it does. I mean, if you are at the bottom as an employee and you had active listening, you probably find that it'll actually help you go up the ranks, because you're better able to connect with your colleagues in that sense as well. As far as additional applications of active listening in the workplace, I mean, it's certainly. I mean, it's something we don't really talk about too often. But even if you're in a sales role, if you know how to actively listen, I mean, it's another skill in your arsenal that you can utilize. So often we sell, and one of my favorite lines, I think my mum must have said it to me one time, and it was be interested, not interesting. As salespeople, we're so concentrating on trying to be interesting, like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. Look at this is everything we can do. But how many of them are taking a moment to go, okay, tell me more about you? I mean, I do some of the biggest sales we do, and I start the conversation off, I just want to learn about them. What do you enjoy? Who are you? What do you like to do with your life? What have you been going through recently? Like first 10 minutes, I don't even care what the conversation was meant to be about. I just want to learn about that person, because now I'm connected with that person. And that's none of this sales 1.0 stuff. It's about actually connecting with people, because at the end of the day, sales is still a relationship. So I guess, if you want to apply active listening to the productivity and business success side of things, then there's also that as well. But we don't talk about it too much, because we're all about mental health, I guess. But there is that side of things as well.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, is the performance angle or performance side of things, creating that high performance team. I mean, every business wants to perform better. I feel like, I guess with leadership in general, it used to be, as I was saying before, it used to be that the smartest person, or the person that did really well at high school with the highest score, you'd think, oh, they're bound to be the most successful people that you ever know. So it's really less about IQ, more about EQ these days. So this sort of stuff fits in. I also think as well, because we are with one of the risks of remote working or hybrid working, is that there's too much digital stuff in the way. Therefore, we lose our human skills along in the process. I feel like Voice of Health, what that does is it's using a digital solution, but you're keeping the human side connected as well.
I'm glad you said that, because that's one of our things. We always say we don't want to take a mechanical approach to human issues. We want to take a human approach to human issues aided by technology, because it's, at the end of the day, we want it to be human centered. We want it to be about the person. We want it to be about their lived experience being the key to them connecting with someone else, as opposed to something more mechanical, or interacting with an app in that sense. We want to, and we made it hard for ourselves, because that facilitation is not an easy thing to do. I see all these super successful apps that are basically just interacting with the app, and they have their place, but we want to try and be a space that is connecting and facilitating that human connection for sure.
With your platform, you've probably collected some different trends or data points that you know about. I'm wondering, probably just if you could tell us, is there a common theme where people are coming on to talk about? Are there some sort of typical issues that you see or you can find,
Yeah.
about from your data?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, we do collect we're obviously not diving into people's conversations or anything
No.
like that because obviously around privacy and everything. But we certainly collect data around the particular areas that people are wanting to get support in or looking to provide support because we want to make sure that we have a nice balance, between the two. I mean, as far as support areas, you know, the natural trends around obviously anxiety and depression being the two biggest support areas is a big one. A huge one recently that we've noticed is certainly around relationships has been a really big one for a lot of people. It's why we're really working hard to try and bring on individuals who might have some experience providing support around that, and also even organizations who do the same. Because I don't know. I assume it's maybe because people are being, potentially they used to go to work each day and they're now like, okay, you're in my space, you're in my space. I need to talk about this. Am I going crazy, or is this actually the situation? So that's been a bit of a trend we've noticed recently as well. And interestingly, we've had a spike in addiction support areas. I'm not sure 100% what that's related to, but it is. We have had an adaptation of this type of service for people who are looking for help within the addiction space as well. So once again, those type of insights really help us to know which organizations we should go out and try and partner with so that we can get those users the right level of support for that, because there are so many niche areas of empathy within this space. So they're kind of probably the most recent trends we've seen, which is interesting. So yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. The separation one, there's more separation and divorces happening at the moment compared to this time 2 years ago, according to a lawyer that I spoke with a few episodes ago, which is interesting. And the addiction one makes sense as well. Just probably more. My assumption would be more loneliness. I guess so. You're turning to those those things that make you feel good in the short term, but not in the long term. Yeah. Really, really interesting, James. So with Voice of Health, just looking, if you can kind of cast yourself 5 years ahead, what's it going to look like? I'm excited to hear this one.
Oh, 5 years. Yeah, no, I guess for us, obviously, we want to continue to grow the community of individuals that we have on the platform, both from a user and active listener side. I guess for us, it's really important to make sure that we have a really rock solid community of active listeners, but also we want to implement a lot of things around, how do we nurture them? How can we supervise them? How can we provide them with amazing opportunities? Like not just, them being there to help others, but how can we grow that community? Because as that expands, so does our impact. And we know that that's kind of the backbone of the success of our organization. For us, we've got some kind of pretty cool implementations for the technology side of things. We've got some, we're in the process of raising capital to be able to develop an algorithm that's going to help us within the AI space to help with facilitating matching and facilitate some other stuff as well. So hopefully that grows as well. Obviously the release, like I said, of that corporate option, we would really like to do, and we think there's an untapped workforce that are looking for opportunities to provide support, and so we think that we can expand there. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Continue to improve our active listening training. I think is a big thing. The better that course is, the better that offering becomes, and the better our active listeners become as well. So yeah, there's a fair bit up the sleeve. We've got some other interesting side stuff as well that we've got to keep a little bit on the down low at the moment. But yeah, some pretty exciting stuff coming up, which we're happy about.
Great, and I'd imagine in this space as well, it's probably more about what you say no to rather than what you do. I'm imagining there's a lot of opportunities for this, which would be really, really interesting. James, thanks so much for your time today. I think for anyone who's listening or watching this now, if they do want to connect with James or even check out the Voice of Health website, we'll connect that information in the comments. And just to clarify, James, the active listening course is a free course. Is that right?
Yes, it's definitely free. Yeah, we same thing. Yeah, like equitable access to mental health support. We made it free, so why not?
That's really cool. So yeah, if anyone's listening and they are interested in exploring that, check it out on the website, Voice of Health. Thanks, James, so much for your time, mate. It's been a really interesting chat, and all the best with Voice of Health over the coming years.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Cheers.